in one day, you're several different people. You've got all these different roles in your life. And in that one day, you might fail at everything. You might fail at one or two things, but you might, or I don't mean you're actually failing, but that feeling of failing and not being who you wanted to be that day. And I think it's more helpful to spread your timeline a little bit instead of trying to do it all in one day. How are you going to show up this month, this week? It's like an average.
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Kristeen Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Becc is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Kristeen is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Kristeen and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
Okay, everybody, hello. How are you doing? We are feeling particularly re-energized today after the How Dare You Darling party yesterday.
It was so much fun. It was so good. Thank you for putting it on, Becc. I had a major transformation in that party. I think you really helped everyone on the call, but I found you helped me to show myself where my blocks were, and what my next steps are. And then I'm really looking forward to coming to Dear Darling, and I know what I'm going to ask to be coached on. I think sometimes that might have been tricky to know what you need to do in your next steps, but I think it was just so masterful the way that you did sort of show that to me. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah, and there were so many beautiful people there on the call, just some really lovely people. So hey, if you're listening, good to see you again. And what was really fascinating was there were some common themes that emerged. This podcast has been inspired by some of the battles that were coming up for people in their family life versus doctor life.
Absolutely. And this is the value of group coaching, right? That we all think that our problems are so individual and specific, but it just takes you chatting to a couple other people who have the same values and the same place they want to go and similar circumstances as you to recognize, gosh, I am not alone here. There's nothing wrong with me. This is such a normal, common challenge. And then we can get to work solving those challenges together and in a way that isn't making us think that we are doomed and that something is just intrinsically wrong with us, but there are actually solutions to these dilemmas that we have. And I'm so glad that you found the session yesterday helpful. I find that kind of work to do on myself helpful as well. This is work that I do on myself to set my compass for where I want to go in life. And I have to do that very deliberately. Otherwise, I do just get swept away in wanting to conform to what other people want and fulfilling other people's requests and even just doing what's normal or typical. That's kind of where my gravitational pull is. But when you stop and you do a bit of work on what's important to you and where you want to see yourself in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 50 years, then as you said, Kristeen, the path is revealed to you in doing that. And like you said, blocks come up, but that is exactly what the path is. The blocks are the path. The block's the thing that you need to be able to overcome to get to your future self. So that's exactly what I wanted to come up for you guys yesterday in the How Dare You Darling party. And for you guys too, if you're going to focus on what you want, hopefully today we're going to set you in a direction that helps you think about more of what you really want for yourself in the future. Don't be surprised when the blocks come up, and just recognize that those blocks are also your path. They're your map. You have to overcome those blocks to become that next version of yourself. They're showing you exactly what you need to work on next to become that future version of yourself. So we wanted to bring that theme from yesterday's party to you guys because it resonated with both of us so strongly. And so it will likely resonate with a lot of you guys too. And the dilemma was that we are so dedicated to our jobs and our role and our impact as a doctor, which is a beautiful thing. You want that in a doctor. I want that in my doctor looking after me or any of my loved ones, any of my family and friends, anybody in the world, to be honest. And when we hold such high and highly valued standards for ourselves as a doctor, that can take resources from these other priorities that we have in our life, which in this call, in this session yesterday, came up primarily as wanting to show up in our relationships in our life, whether it be as a mother, as a parent, or also in any of your other relationships as a partner, as a daughter, as a child, as a brother or sister, as a friend. And I'm sure when we mention that, this wanting to be a good doctor, being in competition with, or feeling like it's in competition with showing up for your relationships in your life, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of you. Does it resonate with you, Kristeen?
Oh, 100%. And it feels like I've lost count of the amount of times that I've been in that situation. And I can think even in the past week where that's shown up for me, just that constant tension. It feels like it's a real heaviness, that feeling where you're doing on any one day, you're many different people, even on one day. So you're doing your job, and then you're doing your partner thing, and then I'm calling my family in Scotland, and then I'm doing all these different roles in the one day, and the interfaces between them are complicated. And I think that's something that we can relate to in terms of I feel like time is our biggest asset. Like, where are we putting our time? How much time would we want to spend with our family or our partner or children versus how much we get to? And is that, how much control do we have over that? You could argue that we have more control than we feel like we do. And then it's this other tension of what other people expect of us, right? What will people say if I leave work on time, or if I don't pick up that shift, or will people say negative things about me as a doctor in terms of my capability or my professionalism, or am I a team player? And so it feels like there are consequences to that. And in some ways, I think in the past I've probably made, I don't know if I really have to question whether I do this now. I think I still do this now to a certain extent, but you almost feel like your loved ones will forgive you. And the work environment won't necessarily forgive you. And so I think, if I'm honest, over time, I think my perspective has been one that's outside of my value set, outside of my integrity. And I often have picked work over something that's actually more important to me. And I think it's been because of the consequences of it, like feeling like I'll be forgiven by my family and friends.
You have just shown me a part of myself that I hadn't even seen. That trap, that pattern of thinking, that is, they will forgive me. That's definitely a block for me that has me making decisions. I'm really making decisions based on fear in that case, aren't I? If I'm saying, well, what decision is going to have a backlash to it or have the worst consequences? Well, my loved ones over here, because they're so beautiful and they love me so much and they are ironically such high value in my life, they will actually forgive me. And therefore, I will be tempted to take the option, like work that feels like it's got the scarier consequences, if they kind of soften the consequences on the other side. And it's like you're saying, it's really like in the moment that might feel like the safer, better decision to make. But the problem is, even though you're perceivedly escaping consequences, you still pay the price for that choice in the end. Because I have those regrets about not choosing my relationships in that situation. Even though in the moment, I feel like I'm making a good decision for myself. I'm reducing the amount of cost and risk associated with avoiding those consequences of the work-related thing, the professional thing. But I'm losing in that situation. I'm picking something that I didn't ultimately actually want. Yeah. And I didn't see until you said that, and just resonated with me that thought, it dresses that decision up to make it sound safe and good and responsible. They'll forgive me. But actually, that thought process leads me to act out of my integrity.
Yeah, and there's some things that you can't go back for. Like, I imagine, I don't actually have children, but I imagine that there are various milestones and times in your child's life that they might need you, and you don't necessarily get another chance to go back and do it again. And I'm not saying that to put any guilt on anyone. I guess I'm just acknowledging that. And something that actually comes up for me was, I remember there was a few years ago, and I had this friend who their dad died really suddenly. And it was, their dad was really healthy. It really came as a shock. And they had asked me to come to the funeral as a support for them. And in the middle of my training, I actually genuinely believed that I couldn't. I genuinely believed that I wasn't allowed to go to that funeral because it wasn't my immediate, mother, father, somebody. Current me would never behave like that. Current me would be like, I'm going to go support my friend. But that's probably because I'm now a consultant and I now realize the system that I work in is not what I thought I was working in. But I'll never get the chance to go back and do that. I'll never get the chance to. And I think there are these moments where, we do get to be forgiven and we do get to, we get another go. But there are also things that can be completely stolen from us. And I mean, that's a really vulnerable example for me. It's just a true example. And I really would like to think I would never show up like that in my life again. But I'm sure there's someone out there listening who had to make a decision like that, or really truly believed they couldn't like leave that shift, couldn't leave it to someone else because of the system we're in.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that, because I know hearing that you're not alone, and I can even give you an example that has even it was an example that came from my perfectionism and my fear of failure that led me to do something that was out of my integrity. Back when I was in med school, I was in some kind of study period for some exam or something, and my partner's sister's wedding was on that weekend. And it was also the first wedding in their family's family. And because I was so afraid of, I had so much doubt in myself about being able to get myself to a point of adequacy to pass the exams, or feel like I, could be comfortable that I was competent to walk into this experience. And if you even take it out even further, like, I didn't even let failure be an option for me there. If I was able to let failure be an option to me, I could have been like, well, actually, what's the worst thing that could happen? I could fail this exam and then I just repeat it, or I make up for it in, I don't know, the next semester or whatever. I didn't even get to the point of thinking about what my other options were to recover on that side, because I was just so controlled by that, by failing at that time. So I am just so glad that I don't make decisions from that limited place in my life anymore. However, even with what you just said before, with that, that sentence you said before about, my family will forgive me, my loved ones will forgive me. I know that there are those sentences in my mind, those thoughts in my mind that still drive me to make decisions because they're safe, rather than the decisions that are actually in my integrity. And I want to work so hard to pull all of those thoughts up to my awareness so I can actually show up in my integrity. But yeah, you are not alone. And I've missed important things at even lower thresholds than, missing a day of work, just not wanting to fail an exam. I've missed important events for in my life.
Yeah. But in some senses, I think that is, I don't think we get to be doctors and come through med school and everything without making sacrifices. And then we almost get used to it. Like, I was laughing with a patient the other day when she was like, "Oh, you're a doctor, you're so clever," or something like that. And I was like, "Lady, I gave up my 20s to be here." But I was joking, but I was also telling the truth. Like, I really did. So, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay. But I was laughing at myself. I was like, yeah, I spent a lot of hours in the library for this moment. So anyway, but I think coming back to what you were saying there about that exam tension versus the wedding, and it is actually conceivable that you would put yourself more at risk of, failing an exam, which could have set you back and things. And a lot of people would be saying, "Oh, you made the right decision." But then equally, you don't get to pass everything. You kind of, in your mind, maybe from your perspective, you failed at turning up to that wedding. And so you don't get to pass everything. And it doesn't, I think the problem is that we feel like we have to choose and that we can only be good at one or the other. And I think that was one of the key things that I wanted to pick your brain on today was, is that really true? Like, do we only get to be good at one or the other and we should just surrender to that? Or is there a way to blend the worlds and actually be able to show up in our values and our integrity and design the life we want? Becc, help us out.
Well, part of what makes me feel sick about that scenario, I feel regret thinking about that scenario. I do. And part of what makes me feel sad thinking about that scenario is that for me back then, she didn't actually have a choice to make. The way that I was thinking about the situation, it could have been like, I want so badly to go to the wedding, but I can't. I can't, because in my mind, failing was not an option. And that kind of thinking, as much as for some people it might be exactly what they want and exactly what they believe and exactly what's in their integrity, that might be the case for some people, and there's no shade to anybody for whom that is their integrity. But for me, it wasn't my integrity. It was fear-driven decision-making. It was fear that was limiting me. It gave me only one choice. And that's really what we first want to bring to light for you guys today, to watch out for when you might have some really rigid rules about what it means to be a good doctor. Let's start over that side. Rigid ideas about what it means to be a good doctor that limit the amount of choice you actually have in your life, including choices to make decisions about how you show up in your relationship. So some examples that I have heard are these sentences like, if I don't take the extra shift, I'm not a good doctor because I'm not being a good teammate. I'm not helping. I'm letting the health system fail. I'm letting my teammates, I'm letting my doctor colleagues have to do extra work without me because I'm not feeling that role. If I don't stay and finish this job, if I don't do the work from this consult call now, if I don't pick up the phone and take this consult call now, I'm not a good doctor. 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. You finish at 4:40. If you're picking up the phone and you're like, well, I've taken the call. So a good doctor would go and see them and make sure, like, I wouldn't just trust the judgment of the person on the phone saying, oh, no, they can be seen on Monday. That's fine. A good doctor would go and see for themselves and trust nobody and do their own assessment. There are just a couple of examples of standards that we hold for being a good doctor that are really rigid. They leave very little room for you to make any other decision. And when you have those kinds of rigid rules, it just leaves you no flexibility to weigh up, what will I do as a doctor to stay in my integrity that also keeps me in my integrity with this other part of my life? In this case, we're talking about relationships, because you staying an extra 90 minutes to do that consult versus missing your date night you'd planned on Friday, or showing up late, having your partner sitting in the restaurant, whatever fabulous thing you decided to do, or your kid waiting at school or daycare, not being able to be picked up on time when they're sitting there expecting you, whatever it might be. And again, we're not saying what is right or wrong here, but it's about what is in your integrity and what is breaching your integrity. If not showing up for your partner or not showing up for your kid at the time that you planned is breaching your integrity, then we really want to have a look at these rigid rules about being a good doctor that conflict and compete with the other parts of your integrity as a whole person.
Yeah, and I love that so much. But I also, as you were saying that, I thought it was so interesting when you were saying, the things in your integrity, and you gave the example of leaving to pick up a child. I feel like there are reasons, we've talked about this before on the potty as well, I think, but there are reasons to leave work that are kind of socially acceptable. Like everyone wants you to leave and pick up your child, and that's fine. But if you were like, I'm just going because I want to go to the gym and have, well-being and stuff, like that seems a lot less acceptable somehow. And I think although I don't think that that's necessarily the way the world should be, I think it's a really interesting thing. So then we can fall into the trap of thinking, well, I don't have a child to pick up. And maybe if you're single and you're going home to an empty house and you're like, well, why should I leave or whatever? It doesn't, I wouldn't want anyone listening to devalue themselves in some way. If like that's what you're sort of saying, is tuning into your own values and what you want to do is actually really important, because I think a lot of these consequences that we're worried about in these fear-based decisions that you're talking about are because of that judgment.
I'm so glad you said that, because even in the picking up the kid example, it's so interesting because I'm sure in some cases it's possible you are the only person who could pick up your child, or the picking up of the child is not able to be organized in some other way. But in a lot of cases, for a lot of people, it probably is possible. And maybe knowing that, Fridays are busy or Tuesdays are busy, or whatever day of the week happens to, like, I often get pushed. I often get presented with this opportunity to stay overtime. You could probably have a backup system set up. I know not everybody is so privileged to be able to do that, but people can have backup systems set up to do things like that. We can set up those systems in our life. And so I think why I'm so glad you brought it up is it highlights, like you said, what we give ourselves permission for as a reason to compete with these rules and priorities that we have. And the socially acceptable aspect of it definitely comes into play when it comes to permission giving, doesn't it? If other people all nod their head and agree, yes, you should go. Sometimes that's the thing that tips you over the threshold. And this is why I think, it's, people who don't have families, doctors who don't have families, or who are older and their families have grown up, or whatever, for whatever reason, they don't have that sympathetic young family, they will end up working more holidays, and they will end up doing more shifts that aren't ideal, or getting leave at time that actually doesn't suit them. And again, if that's what you're choosing for yourself, that's okay. But not claiming your free time as your own to do what is important to you is also a path that's going to lead you to a life that you regret. And just because other people couldn't understand, or other people thought that their time and their priorities were more important than yours, I don't think that reasoning is going to soothe you at all in the years to come when you look back on your decisions. And it's a really hard thing to do when you're different from the other people around you and they don't understand you. But I'd really like to encourage you to think about what's important to you, and every so often zoom forwards into the future and think, am I going to be happy when I look back on this decision in 5 years' time? And that's really where Kristeen and I wanted to go with this, with trying to offer you guys a solution here for this awful dilemma. This dilemma causes so much suffering, feeling like even when you're winning at being a doctor, you're losing, in your relationships, in your family life, or in other areas like your health and so on, or just feeling like you're recreationally doing what you want in your free time, your spirituality. And vice versa. If you're winning in those areas, it feels like it's taking from you being a good doctor. And then anytime you're winning, you're also losing. This is the dilemma that we feel like we're in. And you can only redirect yourself to start living a life, making decisions in these areas that serve you and actually are in your integrity when you get clear about what's in your integrity. And that sounds like a really simple, easy thing to do. It sounds like something that we should just know, that should be on the tip of our tongue, that we should be able to recite the 2 lines of what is important to us in life at all times. But actually, for most of us, that's not the case. We might be able to list a couple of values, but that doesn't mean anything if those values can't help guide you through these difficult decisions. So what I'd actually urge you to do is try and figure out what your values are from a place of looking at these tangible real life scenarios. Looking at not just, I value generosity. I value being present with people. I value being helpful. But what does being helpful look like? What does being generous look like in the scenario when you are at work and your colleagues want your help? And then at home, your family wants your help. At work, your colleagues want your presence. At home, your family wants your presence. So what does that value mean in that context? These are the questions that we want to answer when we're talking about what matters to us.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think getting clear on what's in your integrity, like you said, it's not that obvious unless you sit down and wrestle with it. Because of all that socialization, you can be totally discombobulated as to what are your thoughts and other people's thoughts and impositions and all of that. So I think that's such wise advice to sit down and really gain clarity on what you really think, what you really want for yourself, if in an ideal world, and how you're going to manage that next time you're in this interface where you are feeling that you're not winning in all the areas of your life. But the other thing that Becc and I were sort of chatting about before we came on was this concept of time as well as a possible solution to this. So like I mentioned before, we were talking about how in one day, you're several different people. You've got all these different roles in your life. And in that one day, you might fail at everything. You might fail at 1 or 2 things, but you might, or I don't mean you're actually failing, but that feeling of failing and not showing up how you quite like to, you shout at your kid, or I don't know what you do, but just not wanting to be not being who you wanted to be that day. And I think it's more helpful to spread your timeline a little bit instead of trying to do it all in one day. How are you going to show up this month, this week? It's like an average. Would you agree, Becc?
I could not agree more. It actually, one of the struggles that brought me into coaching, well, the reason I came to coaching is because I was struggling with overeating and managing my weight. That was actually what brought me into mindset coaching, because I tried everything else. I tried every diet. I tried every formula. I tried every type of exercise from, to the craziest forms. I tried all this stuff to change my situation, to fix that physical seeming problem. On one of my adventures, one of my adventures in trying to manage my weight was calorie counting. And so I would look at each day and I'd set a calorie target for each day of how much food I would let myself eat. Such an awful time. I do not recommend this, for the record. This was a bad phase in my life. But what I do is I'd look at these 24-hour periods and I would have a calorie limit for myself. And if I went over that calorie limit, I would throw my hands in the air, or probably more accurately, throw myself on the ground and think, oh my gosh, I am terrible. I have stuffed up everything. I've just ruined everything. And then I realized, when my brain got back on board, that what I do within this one specific 24-hour period isn't what determines what my body understands about the world and how my body adapts to the world. Actually, the next day, I have certain energy expenditure that I use, and I have a certain calorie amount that I will take in. And actually, if I overate, in quotation marks, team, just going back to this mentality, if I overate, quotation marks, in that 24-hour period the day before, I could average out my calories on the next day. And that's actually what happens to me now in practice when I don't count my calories. There'll be some days where I eat more, and then other days I'll eat very little. And as Kristine's saying, it's about how it averages out. It's not actually about what you do specifically in every day or what you do specifically in any moment. So in that moment, when I say, no, I'm not going to stay and do overtime on Friday at 4:30 p.m., I'm not going to go and see this consult. When I say, no, I'm not going to take that extra shift, my mind says, you're not a good doctor. It's just taking in that data set for that moment of time, that decision. It's looking at this single decision, this moment in time, this 24 hours, and it's like, based on this 24 hours, you are not a good doctor. But what Kristine's saying is, whether you're a good doctor or not, more likely in your integrity isn't made or broken in one day, but it's more likely based on your average. What have you done in a week as a doctor? What have you done in that month as a doctor? What have you done in your year, your lifetime as a doctor? That's probably going to be how you'd more accurately assess your in your integrity, whether you're a good doctor or not. And it's the same with your relationships. Sometimes our decisions in the moment will look like they don't match up with us being a good doctor or a good partner, a good parent, a good child, a good sibling, a good friend, for example, in this relationship example. But we want to be careful of that trap that Kristine's talking about, of taking one little action and using that to make a big generalization about ourselves. And this kind of thinking is overgeneralization, but it's also got tones of black and white thinking. These are really common tricks and traps of the mind. These are known biases of our mind to think in these ways.
Yeah, but I love that. So I guess combining those two, like having a think about your integrity, your values, and I guess not jumping to conclusions in the moment, really having a think about it, really unpacking it, finding out what's yours and what's been imposed on you through time. And then combining that with the timeline, broadening that timeline, giving yourself a bit more space to succeed, I guess. And then it feels like those two things coming together helps to almost redefine the definition of success. Because all of a sudden it's not about today in this moment, it's about an average overall, and it just feels so much more achievable. I feel like just talking that through with you, it feels like I can breathe better. And would you advise then that we do like a reflective exercise? You mentioned looking back and looking forward. Could you elaborate on the process that you go through with this?
Yeah, I had to make some really hard decisions in my life recently between the work I want to do, my mission, what is in my integrity, something that is really, really important to me in my life, and the way that was competing for resources in my relationship. And the decisions that I made at the time didn't always feel good in the moment. But I was aware, like you will be now, that just because it feels bad in the moment, it doesn't mean that it is out of your integrity. It might just be those thoughts and those errors in thinking coming up and producing some guilt or some fear or some doubt or some criticism for yourself. So when I make decisions that don't feel good, but I'm suspicious that, I've been through a good thinking process here, I'm on the right track, then a really great way to check in, and this is what I used in this instance, and I know that Kristeen used this too, is to zoom ahead and say, well, firstly, if I look back on this decision in 5 years' time with a bit of perspective and with more years ticking away of my life and my experience, what will I think in that case about this decision I made? Will I be happy that I made this decision? Will I be proud of myself that I made this decision? And even if it didn't go well, will I be proud of myself and happy with myself that I took that chance and created that opportunity? And that perspective that you can get from your future self can be so wise. That part of you that is thinking not just in the moment, but about your life as a bigger picture can offer you so much wisdom. As a coach, I don't give people advice, but I help people tap into those parts of themselves that can give really great advice to ourselves. And the other part of it for me is, if I'm worried about the worst case scenario, and I wish I did this all these years ago when I had that wedding opportunity and I had that exam coming up, I wish I took myself to the place of being like, well, let's just go to that place where I do fail the exam. Let's go to my worst case scenario. Will I regret having gone to the wedding because I don't pass my exam? Will my future self in 5 years regret it if that worst case scenario happens? Will I be unhappy with that decision? Because the answer would have been no. If I was tapped into my integrity, then it would have been no, I wouldn't regret it. If I failed the exam, I know my resourcefulness. I actually, now I trust myself, and maybe back then I didn't, but I would trust myself to find another way to create what I wanted in my life. And there were so many other solutions that come to mind. Resitting, or worst case, doing another year. Oh my goodness, not the end of the world. But zooming out to that future self, and also taking a bit of time to go to that worst case scenario that you don't want to think about, because our resourcefulness lives there too. Our solutions come from seeing the problems clearly.
I absolutely love that. And I also love how whenever I think about what my future self would say, it's always like, what are you talking about? None of this matters. And I'm all hot and bothered. And it's like, this is completely irrelevant to the world. Why are you spending energy on this? But to me in the moment, it's like, I got some dramas I need to resolve. So funny.
Me too. Actually, yeah. My future self's so much more like relaxed and cool, and like she knows what's important.
Can't wait to be her. Wonder when that'll happen. Sure, she's hot and bothered about something.
Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We hope it was useful. We really wanted to empathize with this dilemma that seems to be so common. Like the theme that came up in our How Dare You Darling party was so obvious and just so relatable. And when these women said these things, I was like, oh, yes, yes. And I'm just thinking about all the other people who'd be like, yes. So we hope that bringing this up has helped you too.
Yeah, thank you so much as always for listening. And of course, let us know if this has been helpful in the comments below. And if you feel that leaving us a little honest review, 5 stars, if that comes organically to you, we would love that. Thank you so much.
An honest 5 stars. We would appreciate that. But seriously, we just love to hear from you, and we'd love to be able to share your comments here or your reviews here as well to celebrate and thank you. Bye. Bye, guys.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up in